paint to create these works. Marble's really expensive. Paint is really expensive. You can't just make a painting and try to sell it. Blue, for example, the color blue, you have to crush lapis lazuli, a very expensive stone, into the paint to get the color. So all of this is why you have it born in Florence, but all of a sudden, in the 1400s, the Pope is getting very wealthy. And so with that money, he brings down all of these artists. He gets wealthy, by the way, by selling indulgences. Ever heard of the selling of indulgences? Yep. You sort of give, say, 5,000 gold coins to the Pope, you get yourself a certificate that says you just bought yourself 500 years out of purgatory, so it's literally like a ticket to heaven. Yeah. So you could kind of live as immoral life as you want, give enough money to the Pope, you can buy your way into heaven. So it sounded just as controversial then as it is today, but he got so much money so quickly that he's able to bring all these people down. And he says, you know what, enough with the old St. Peter's, it's been there for 1,000 years, I want a new St. Peter's, starts taking it apart, building the one that you see today. He needs a chapel in the meantime, he starts building the Sistine Chapel, that's Sixtus V, it's just named after him. And as all of that's happening, the people come, construction workers are moving there, they need markets to buy food, they need schools for their children, the whole city starts to grow, they're digging down and they start to find all of these incredible works of art and architecture beneath the surface of Rome. So it's that physical contact between the sort of emerging Renaissance and antiquity that happens only in Rome, that's the only place we're going to find so much of this just beneath the surface of the city, that the Renaissance is born. And that the entire way that art and architecture are made for the next 400 years in Europe is going to change forever. So this then gets dispersed throughout the entire world. And there's some pieces which are so famous that just one piece will change the entire course of art history. And we can understand that through these in Michelangelo. There was one piece called the Laocoon sculpture. It's a funny name, Laocoon. It comes from the name of the priest in Troy who was privy to the knowledge that the Greeks were going to attack, they were going to use the big Trojan horse to get in. He's going to warn the king of Troy not to let them in, and to stop him, basically from warning the king, according to the story, this is Homer's version, the Greek gods send these two serpents over the ocean to kill him and his two sons. So in this sculpture, what you see is Laocoon, his two sons, fighting against these serpents. Basically, one is biting in. Have you seen these before? Yeah. It's very famous. You see it in the Vatican. It's been in the same place basically ever since it was found. One is biting into his side. One is biting into the child. Another one is trying to get it off of his leg. And basically, this was always described in all of ancient Roman documents as being the most beautiful, the most incredible work of antique marble. So in 1506, a farmer's digging on the Palatine Hill in the center of Rome, hits a piece of marble, notifies the Pope, because the Pope passes a law saying that if you try to keep something, he's going to basically, the penalty is essentially death if you try not to give something to the Pope. So everything goes to the Vatican. That's why you see so much there today. So this piece is basically identified, and the farmer says, this looks like something incredible. So the Pope sends Michelangelo. They go, they dig it up, and Michelangelo realizes instantly that this is the great Laocoon sculpture that everyone's read and heard so much about but never seen before. So what's incredible about this sculpture is how lifelike it is. He's like this, so if you've seen it, he's got the serpent, he's fighting against it, and you can see every vein, every tendon in his foot, every sort of little detail of the musculature, it looks lifelike. And no one's seen that before. Before that, you have these more sort of natural poses. If you think of Michelangelo's work before that, or you'll see in Rome, you have the Pietà, the sort of delicate body of Christ, and the arms of Mary looks very thin and natural. Whereas later you have David, and even the Christ in the Last Judgment that Michelangelo paints, who's incredibly robust. So that robust style, like all the figures in the ceiling, emerges from that sculpture. And even all of his other sculptures, like these two, are based on the two sons. So I mentioned that one son had his leg up, he's trying to get the serpents off. That's just like that son there, that's that slave. And this one, the dying slave, you have the struggling slave and the dying slave. The dying slave was like the dying son, with his arm up behind his head, trying to basically, or succumbing to the serpent biting from the side. So he was literally copying, showing that he could make just as good with his sculptures as they could in antiquity. So there was another piece found, the torso of Hercules, which had no head, no arms, and no legs beneath the knee, but it was twisted like this. And Michelangelo takes that cut and paste, literally paints it exactly as it is, and completes it as Christ with his arm up and his arm down, sending people to heaven, banishing them to hell in the Last Judgment. So the idea of the Renaissance initially was to show through both painting and sculpture that they could do things just as well as this ancient, basically, culture that existed and they found remnants of underneath the surface of their city. So it's a totally different concept than we have today. They actually discovered that people were much more advanced over a millennium and a half before them. So that's what the early Renaissance is about. That's basically what the first part of painting and everything that we're going to see in sculpture is about. We're actually just going to look at a few sculptures and spend most of our time focusing on painting. But the interesting thing about this is because they were for Julius and they weren't finished, basically, because he never was able to make the whole thing, even the individual sculptures, if you walk around the back, you're going to see that they're still in solid blocks of marble, that he never finished them, which is very rare for Michelangelo. So let's go around the back. So none of that we'll ever know, but we do know that this is one of the greatest works from the 2nd century BC. This will be the last work of sculpture we see. We're going to now go into the Italian collection, and we're going to go more or less chronologically, beginning in the 1200s, just touching on a few pieces to get up to the Renaissance and see some of the greatest works in the Louvre's collection. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Unbelievable.
So this is the corridor I was talking about in the beginning. This is what Francois I built to connect his palace to the Queen's palace and to display his collection in Italian art. So we're seeing it again more or less in the exact same place that he had it. And if we look at these now Renaissance paintings, this is from Venice. This is Saint Sebastian. You always know it's Saint Sebastian because he's killed with arrows. It brings together a lot of the things that we've been talking about. Even in painting, they're trying to show that they can make figures, represent the figure, as well as the ancients could. So they love Saint Sebastian as a theme because it's Christian, but it allows them to show the nude body, which is what almost all ancient pagan sculptures look like. They always show the emperors without clothes and all of that because it was the most noble way to show them. Christianity is not quite that sort of liberal in the exposure of the human body, but Saint Sebastian.
The light was muted on that because it was painted in Florence, and that's the way the light is there.
Who paints some of the early cycle of frescoes on the lower level of the Sistine Chapel. His palette, I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of the Sistine Chapel or been there, but these colors are almost exactly the same as the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And it was painted by Michelangelo. And that's because this was the artist in whose studio Michelangelo apprenticed for a year. So Michelangelo always likes to say he didn't learn anything from anybody, he's sort of self-taught genius, but in fact he almost uses the exact same palette as his master, Ghirlandaio. You can see the mustard yellows, the blues, the light blues. This is when Mary is telling Elizabeth that she's pregnant with Christ, and so you have this sort of foreshadowing. Mary Jacobi, Mary Salome, one witnesses Christ's crucifixion, the other witnesses his resurrection, so it's sort of foreshadowing his entire life. All within the scene, which has perfect perspective. You see the pediment sort of going out, and everybody starts doing that after. So it becomes almost like the stamp of a Renaissance painting: perspective, blue mountains, and a sense of depth. So let's move down.
Even the halos are in perspective, like they're discs.
Yeah, they're no longer flat. You actually feel like it. Let's look at one more Saint Sebastian. And there are many. This is Perugino. He's the other famous early Renaissance painter. This is the generation that is before Michelangelo. And with this one, he almost doesn't put any arrows, because again, he just wants to show the figure as if it were Roman sculpture. You've got perfect perspective, and the perspective is used really cleverly here, because see the tiles on the floor? If you trace those lines back, where are they going to meet? About at his knees. So where the lines meet in perspective, basically, even if you trace the top of the column there, you trace that line down, it's going to come to here. You trace this line up, it's going to come to here. Where all those lines meet is the horizon line. The horizon line is always at the eye level of the viewer. So he's putting us, through this clever use of perspective, on our knees, looking up at the saint. So that's what you could do with perspective. You could actually use it to force the viewer, and this painting is hung exactly as it should be, to feel like they're in a certain relationship to the figure in the painting. So other than that, you've got something in a ruin, typical of, this has to show something broken since it's a reference to ancient Rome. You've got this great deep perspective, and again, blue mountains. Every painter is doing this. More or less. They look like, but basically, Leonardo da Vinci, we'll see, it's actually what we're going to see next, he's the father of the Renaissance, literally. So he changes the way people paint, they start copying him, and things like that become just stamps of a good painting. So let's go look.